Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for joining us for another episode of All the Angles, the Business of Padel podcast worldwide, powered by the Hexagon Cup. This week, our focus is on New York, New Jersey area. I'm joined this episode by Santi from Padel Haus, New York, as well as John from Padel United Sports Club. We're fortunate to explore this area with them, two of the biggest pioneers in the space and in that part of the United States. Thank you both for joining us. Before we get started, if you enjoy this episode or have benefited from previous ones, please like, share, subscribe. It helps. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, I want to start by just looking at your career backgrounds and what you did before you decided to launch these padel clubs, these padel brands. Let's start with you, Santi. What was the highlight in your career and how do you think that prepared you to launch a padel business and a padel brand?
Yeah, my background is before opening Padel Haus, I was in the hospitality business. I built and created multiple brands starting in New York in the restaurant business. One of them Cosme, another one Atla. And I've always been drawn to building brands and experiences. So I think my background in hospitality and entrepreneurship gave me some insight and confidence to bring Padel to New York.
And what about you, John, from your side? What prepared you for launching this endeavor?
The exact same thing, which I can't believe. My career started off in real estate, specifically within retail and retail development. Manhattan and major metropolitan cities, so DC, LA, San Francisco. Started off with SoulCycle and then Bluestone Lane and other brands. And it is, just like Santi said, a true passion of mine to create physical experiences that bring people together. Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. So let's get right back to the beginning. So Santi, when you opened the first Padel Haus, it was pretty much a virgin market, far from the latent awareness and interest that already existed in Miami. So what convinced you that New York was ready for a padel offering when you started?
I think New York City thrives on new trends and premium experiences. And I think that the city needed a proper paddle facility. And I knew that if it was executed well, the demand would follow. And I think that New York and in general, any city that does not have paddle today has the potential to grow to multiple locations and there will be the demand that will follow. I think that's been the case pretty much anywhere in the world. And the US is just catching up kind of last minute to this trend.
And just to follow up, so you, correct me if I'm wrong, Williamsburg was the first location?
That was the first location, yes.
Yeah, so when you opened in Williamsburg, was that always the target in the Brooklyn area, or did you have other target areas in mind?
Well, I must have walked at least 115 spaces before signing that one. It was 1 year pretty much of looking at spaces anywhere in New York City, meaning Manhattan, Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Dumbo, Queens, Long Island City, Greenpoint. But we landed at Williamsburg for two reasons. One is because that's where I lived. And number two, I think Williamsburg has the right mix of like early adopters and fitness focused culture. So I think that was perfect for Padel's growth and for the first Padel club to open.
And John, turning to you, when you launched Padel United Sports Club, you've started in Cresskill. And was that, again, a specific target region for you, or were you also a bit more flexible about where you wanted to put your first flagship location?
My approach and experience was very different. I actually had never played paddle, never even heard of it, 4 months before we signed our lease for the space. So I spent almost my entire life in the city, certainly my sort of adult professional life building in Manhattan. I was actually across the street from Santi's, I think his first restaurant, Atla, maybe second. I don't know which one
Second,
came first.
Cosmic came
Second.
first.
So
Yep.
so my office is pre-COVID. We're at 399 Lafayette. So my office looked at Atla. We were on the second floor, and I was there 4 days a week. I moved out to the suburbs, which I never thought I would do. Certainly not Jersey, because of COVID. And I just started building better hospitality experiences around this area because there was nothing. And I was very new to the suburbs and the suburban sort of like way of life. I was approached by my current business partner, who was an entrepreneur who had also just left the city. And we were both actually just wanting to build kind of like a lifestyle fitness wellness experience. And Padel kind of merged into that. Um, in truth, neither of us had even played the sport until 4 weeks before we opened. And we did that at Racket X in Miami for about 7 minutes. I would say I approach this really philosophically from a business standpoint and a supply and demand, and then this belief in the metrics that we had learned about in Europe and other places where paddle's already been well adopted. I think that it was a little bit of a roll of the dice on a personal level. I now play 6 days a week and fully understand exactly where the sport is headed and the adoption that will happen in the United States. There is no question. And we got very lucky. I mean, our building, which is about a 33,000 square foot warehouse, is in the middle of one of the most affluent suburbs in the country. And the rest has been evolving. Now we're obviously very excited about the sport and the growth and et cetera.
And so the offering at Padel United is obviously wider than just the 6 courts that we can see clearly over your shoulder. So there's the spa and the spa adjacent services. Did you feel, I think you alluded to this in your last question, did you feel that that was necessary from the start, that it needed to be a 360 multi-experiential kind of leisure and relaxation facility rather than just a pure paddle play?
Yeah, for me, yes. For the genre overall, no. Just to be clear, I think that there's multiple models that will be super successful with this. But based on my experience and what I know is the already existing demand for that sort of alternative to a golf or tennis club versus sort of just paddle right now, which is really only just starting to adopt and at a very small level percentage wise to I think where it will be in the next 2 and 5 years. It was critical that we had, the pools and the gym and the restaurant and club and all that stuff. Because we're in a suburb, there's really, and this is no different than any affluent suburb, the golf and tennis courts are either very premium and expensive or dying, right? Because they've been around for 30 years and it's just too hard to recapitalize them to meet the demands of a newer generation. Um, so that was the opportunity that we saw. And I think that, again, I spent 20 years building in Manhattan, and that is no fun whatsoever. And it's certainly gotten more and more complicated. To build something like this would have cost 3 to 4 times the amount of capital, the time to build, and the rent. And so this is the model that we're very comfortable with, and for the most part, staying away from cities.
And Santi, to turn to Padel House, touching on what John's mentioned. So, what's your or Padel House's approach to beyond the 20 by 10, right? So, your Padel House is a lot more of a purer paddle play, but that's not to say that that's all you guys offer in your venues. How do you approach the more diversified offering concept?
I think that just like John said, there's cost associated with New York City that make you realize that you need to have ancillary services. And just beyond the courts, I think Padel House integrates premium hospitality. It has a retail component with Juice House, which is our food and beverage solution. We have a pro shop on site. We have community driven events. And also, we launched what didn't exist in the paddle world, which were memberships, just to help with revenue. So today, the 20 by 10 generates only about 65% of our revenues. The rest is shoulder services.
Mm-hmm. And Santi, can you touch a little bit about Domino Park? So Domino Park is very close to an existing indoor venue that you have. It's pretty much like a stone's throw away, but it's outdoors. It's got an iconic location with iconic views. Can you talk a little bit about why you felt that that was such an interesting opportunity for the brand and such a powerful, I guess, exposure for the brand?
Yeah, I think Domino Park, first of all, it elevates the brand and it creates a setting that probably has never seen before. No, you see the skyline of Manhattan there, beautiful sunsets, elevated platform on in Domino Park, and it just happened to be, as you say, right across the street from our Williamsburg location. So when we first opened it, the first season was this would be the third summer, 3 summers ago. It was all about visibility and exposure. There was a lot of people that did not know paddle that just passed by, saw it, and walked in and wanted to give it a try.
So it's the top of the funnel for you guys, I guess.
Yes, however, over time we've realized that to operate indoor facilities gives you certainty on programming, on revenues, and a few other stuff. So all of our future locations, besides Domino Park, all of our current and future locations are going to be indoor.
Okay. And let's talk about pricing a bit, because I think pricing is a hot topic in the US paddle scene. And generally, at least in my experience, I've been to Padel Haus. I've played at Padelphia in Philadelphia. I'm hopefully get the chance to go to one of the sites in Boston. There's obviously Sensor and Padel Boston have opened up fairly recently. But it's not cheap. And I think you touched on this, John, in one of your early answers. Can you talk Can both of you talk a little bit about how you approach the issue of pricing and perhaps more importantly, how you address or offset any concerns that are developing in the market, the wider market, as well as the NYNJ market about elitism and around the paddle experience? And maybe Santi, you can touch on this because obviously you've got to offset your costs, but it does become quite a barrier to entry for some people. No?
Pricing, I think it's a topic that we can talk about it for hours. But I think our pricing at Padel House reflects the cost of bringing a world-class paddle experience to the US, right? If you're comparing it to Europe, the sport has existed for decades, right? And building a facility here, and John probably will agree with me, but building a facility indoor here requires significant investment in real estate, in construction, top tier materials, and to ensure best playing conditions year round. And in terms of accessibility, we work to balance premium quality and inclusivity. We offer different types of memberships, different tiers of memberships. We have a pay as you go option as well, community driven events to make paddle available to a broader audience. But in general, I think what we're trying to do is grow the sport in a sustainable way.
And just before I turn to you, John, like Santi, do you have programs? You talk about these memberships. Can you give us a bit more detail? Because I think there will be some who assume that it is just a elitist experience, especially if you're on the doorstep of Manhattan. It kind of has to be. But can you touch a little bit more about what you're doing to try and make sure that it is available to a broader range than just people who might think that it's just this exclusive experience?
Yeah, actually, we have probably 70% of our reservations are done by non-members. You can either just walk in or download the Padel House app and you can book a court without having a membership. So
Mhm.
it's accessible to anyone.
And John, what about you? How do you tackle some of the limitations that a pricing strategy can impose upon you at the area that you're in?
So, as a first part of the strategy, which I don't think we actually intentionally did, but we had a couple of people who were in the industry who were close from an advisory standpoint who gave us some of this advice. But I would say for the first 6 months before we opened up the wellness, 60% of the people who came in played for free. Nobody heard about paddle here virtually, right? We're in New Jersey. We're 20 minutes from the city, but the city has its own universe to tap into through social media, et cetera. So, in fact, we had to spend a huge amount of time explaining to people that this isn't paddle tennis because that's a pretty
Right.
prevalent sport around here. Um, so, eh, we have a very different cost basis. So we were able to do that, and we did do that. And I would imagine that we will do that going forward as a strategy, where we'll release the courts first, um, allow people to play. I think that what I've seen, and this is my office, so I just every minute of every day I watch the consumer experience. Um, if somebody plays twice, they're hooked. About a 90 something percent chance. So I think it's important for us, at least, to allow as little friction as possible as it relates to the courts and that first time play. From there, we have I would say we have a relatively lower base. in terms of our pricing. And we definitely have a relatively lower cost structure than I'm sure what Santi has in the city. You could talk about this in two contexts, right? The individual boxes, right? Padel Haus, Padel United, Reserve, etc. And then you could talk about the sport overall. My general thesis here is that I'm sure we all want to open a lot of these all over the country, and I know Santi is, and we're looking, and everybody else is as well. At this early of a stage, it is really important that as many people play as possible. The sport really does the rest of the work. It's incredible. My entire life, I think I played every single sport, football, tennis, hockey, fairly competitively. There is no sport that I have found that is more addictive than this. So it's
Amen.
like, just let the people play, and the sport will do the rest of the work. Or actually, not the sport itself. Guys like me and Santi and other people will do a lot of heavy lifting as well, right, to get these things open. But there is this sort of, it is just incredible. I mean, it really is. So there has to be, and there is already, I've gotten to spend a lot of time with the people who are helping drive this, a sense of sort of camaraderie and collaborativeness. And we're all sort of experiencing at different levels this for the first time because the country is for the first time. And how do we all work together and leverage off of the information to ensure that the experience for the customers is as accessible as possible and really and great?
Another thing I
And,
wanted to add here on pricing as well is and this is because people tend to compare the prices of paddle in the US to Europe, right? Europe, countries like Spain have 20,000 courts. What would happen if they closed 15,000 courts today in Spain? The prices would probably go up,
yeah.
right? And also the experience that you see in clubs like Padel House, you mentioned Reserve, Padel United, any other of the US clubs, I think it's a premium experience and hence it reflects a premium price. And sometimes you don't get the European experience, which is more like a lower cost experience.
And just to build on the point, John, you made about access to as many people as possible, one of the problems that some up and coming markets in paddle have, it's not unique to the US, is getting kids interested in it. Obviously, you get a lot of adults through the door, middle-aged people, older people, they've got disposable income, they've got the curiosity, free time. They come in, they get hooked, as you said. But the base of the pyramid that is youngsters and kids, which will hopefully become the talent and the pro players of the future, it's a big focus, not just for individual clubs, but obviously the FIP as well. Is this something that both your clubs think about working with youth or community centers or schools or universities to try and build up that young component of the player base? Can you touch on that, John, first?
Yeah, so every single member virtually has 2 to 3 kids under the age of 12 here, right? We are in a suburb. I would say 70% of our market within a 6 mile radius had moved from Manhattan in the last, 5 to 7 years. Um, and I have 3 kids, 6, 3, and 2. My 6 and 3-year-old play 3 to 4 times a week. It's the same thing, right? It's an incredible sport for kids. And so I think at this point now, almost 80% of our memberships, we have a family and individual membership. So our family memberships, and we've increased our kids clinics by almost 70% in the last 2 months. And again, so I'm like the focus group, right? I'm just watching my kids, especially when you think about other sports that might be a little more violent and all this stuff around head trauma. It's a perfect layup. And it's not because like I'm so smart. It's the sport.
Santi, do you have that kind of arm in your strategy with regards to kids and youth?
In terms of strategy, yes, I think we're starting partnerships with local schools, with organizations to introduce paddle to kids. We partner up with a few universities here in New York City, NYU. We have a group from Columbia. But in general, just like John mentioned, kids move out of the city, or parents move out of the city to have kids. So because of that, we don't have that many kids playing today at the New York City locations. But going forward, and when we go to other cities and our clubs are located more closer to where families are, definitely, I think it's the future of the sport. And once the sport can make its way to universities, I think that's when the whole game is going to change.
Yeah.
and a new
Agreed.
generation of players are going to start playing.
Yeah. And on that point, we're actually launching because we're surrounded by a couple of pretty high profile tennis universities here. So we're launching in the next month a college membership, which will be heavily reduced during and accessible for off hours, which is ironically when the college kids are around. So I agree. Once this gets into colleges and that age range, there will be this tipping point, I think.
This is a problem nationwide in general. A lot of kids, a lot of teenagers are not playing paddle because it's not a sport that will get them a scholarship to go through college. So they're choosing tennis or probably soon pickleball. But once that changes and the sport can get kids into college, and there's a few groups already putting things in motion, I think that's going to be a tipping point.
I 100% agree with both of you. I had a conversation with Ryan Redondo from Tactica about this because my brother was a tennis student athlete at the University of Virginia from the UK. And it was for him pivotal to his whole career, to his ability to do a qualification at the same time as pursuing and actually progressing his tennis career. I think he believed at the time that he would step backwards in his tennis abilities by going to a college for 3 or 4 years, but it actually did the opposite. It completely supercharged his confidence and his abilities. And he went on to have a pro career for almost 20 years. So I think it's not even just a game changer for America, right? Because I agree with you that American parents will take paddle seriously in a way that they don't now if they know that it might be able to get their son or daughter through college or potentially on a scholarship. But actually, international as well. I mean, Virginia had Indian kids coming playing tennis. You have Bulgarians coming playing volleyball on the college program. So if you had a paddle program that was also available, like the existing scholarships, to international talent, that might be a game changer for a lot of international parents as well, from India, China, other parts of the world, who would go, well, I want my son to go through university or my daughter to go through university in the US. Now paddle can help them. At the moment, that doesn't exist. But I think, as you said, people in America probably have a sense that this would be a game changer. And that's why there's people working on it, as you mentioned. But I think internationally as well, if the international ecosystem of paddle comes to realize what a pivotal thing this can be for parents investing in their kids and choosing their kids' future sports, yeah, game changer
The,
is an understatement.
I think the first opportunity for that is in the Olympics. Behind the scenes, you can obviously integrate the colleges and all of that, but I think the Olympics is really the first opportunity to bring this onto a much more widely, globally accepted and adopted sport. And it'll happen. It's just a question of when.
Yeah. We were talking obviously about the base of players. What about the split of men and women? How does that look in your respective clubs? My sense is actually it would probably be fairly good in both your clubs, but I don't want to speculate. And what's the key to encouraging women to pick up this sport and play? Santi, you want to have a go at that first?
When we opened almost 3 years ago, the first club, I think we were probably 90% men, 10% women. This has changed. I think now we are probably at 65% men, 35% women. And we're continuously encouraging female participation. We are creating dedicated leagues just for women. We're hosting tournaments and we integrate more divisions for women. We've brought female coaches on board, and that's also been a game changer. My girlfriend, for example, she's a player. She just started playing about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And she was telling me all the time, I would take lessons 5 times a week if there was a female coach. So I think that's helped a lot. And just creating events that are targeting women.
And what
Yeah.
about from your side, John?
So we have this very different dynamic again, just because of where we are, right? Like I mentioned, 80% of our memberships are family memberships. So virtually everybody was married. And so they'll bring their wife. So if we started off 80-20, men to women, we're now at almost probably 60-40. And I can see it going to full 50-50, like very quickly. My wife started playing 3 weeks ago. I don't remember when, but it happens to everybody. But I would say like her second lesson, she woke up in the middle of the night and she was like, holy shit, I can't wait to get back on the court tomorrow. By now it's over, right? 3 days a week, 4 days a week. To me, it's like a little lab. I get to watch. It's the same thing for everybody. It happens to everybody. The bug, the itch, whatever. Like It just happens. So I think our location benefits from just having this natural, the husband may start off, then the woman comes, and maybe they're just starting off and they're like, yeah, I just really want to use the gym and the pool. Eventually they make it onto the court.
Yeah, fair point. And I think now is a good point in this conversation just to talk about the elephant in the room, which is pickleball. So, how do your respective businesses and brands treat pickleball? Do you see it as a rival? Do you see it something that you want to bring into the fold of what you offer? Is it something that you're pretty ambiguous about or not concerned? How do you guys approach the pickleball phenomenon and the difference between pickleball and paddle? Is that a problem? Is it a solution? I'm just curious of your views on it. John, do you want to get started?
I have very strong opinions about it.
I was hoping he would go
I,
first.
I knew you could see it in the smile.
Yeah.
As an individual, it's not my sport. I'll say that. I think for anybody over 65, I think it's the greatest thing in the world. Um, as it relates to integrating within the club, we're all in on paddle. If we could have four more courts here, we would. We originally, when we were building, because of how new the sport was, we spent a couple of weeks sort of just torn on, do we put a tennis court in just as like a feeder? It was never going to be a pickleball court. And now the more courts we could open, in my opinion, the better. So I don't see us integrating into that. I could see an acquisition of an existing business and then transitioning existing pickle courts into paddle courts. And if something's already up and running, and we're looking at a couple of opportunities like that. There's some much larger facilities, to the tune of 100, 150,000 square feet that have, 9 tennis courts and 12 pickle. Maybe it exists in that capacity for us as a brand, right? But in terms of that would have to come through like an acquisition. In terms of just our strategy right now, it's to open up indoor facilities. If we can get a one or two courts outside, that would be great too. But, no less than 6 courts up to, 8 to 9, and then our wellness. But again, for me, pickle is a great sport for anybody over 60, 65 years old. Um, it's just not my cup of tea.
Santi, any plans for Pickle House?
No plans for Pickle House. I think pickle is not part of our offering in the near future, probably not in our lifetime. But I do think that pickle, in a way, and all racket sports are complementary to each other. Like somebody that plays tennis doesn't mean that they're not going to play pickleball. Somebody that plays pickleball doesn't mean they're not going to play paddle. So they complement each other in a way. I also think that pickleball has a good place in society because it's making people play a sport that wouldn't do sports otherwise. So I don't see Padel House integrating pickleball, but I do think that it helps in a way. And I also think that there's a one-way conversion from tennis to paddle and from pickleball to paddle. It doesn't go the other way. People just come to paddle, but paddle players are not leaving their paddle rackets to go play pickleball.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I played tennis for 30 years. I don't think I picked up a racket in a year.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I grew up on tennis. I
And
got
I've heard that from 70 people.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a
We actually
well trodden path.
Yeah.
we started a program that we would, if you brought your pickle paddle or your tennis racket, we would buy it off you and we'll give you a paddle racket.
That's great. I like
Great idea.
that. Let's talk about the future. So, Santi, I think you're about to open in Nashville. I think you announced Atlanta quite recently. Can you talk us through these two locations and what they mean for Paddle House for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of growth, expansion, diversification of offerings? What's the theory behind it?
Yeah, I think Nashville is the first one. Nashville is a fantastic facility. It's already fully built. We're opening, we have the grand opening in a couple weeks on February 20th or so. We have 8 courts there, indoors, all of them, high ceilings. We announced just this week the start of the construction of the Atlanta location. We have 6 indoor courts there. We have a Denver facility as well that is under construction. Also 6 courts indoor downtown Denver. And those are our 2025 projects. Well, we have one more project here in New York in Greenpoint, which is a ground up building exactly in McCarran Park that is going to be ready by this summer as well.
And so, are all the experiences going to be very similar to the existing Padel House experiences, or is there going to be any variety or nuance in what you offer in different markets?
Pretty similar. We have a few additional things in the Nashville location. This is a 40,000 square foot warehouse. And we have a golf sim. We're going to launch a kids room as well in the Nashville location. And something that I believe John has, we're going to have a robotic massage table.
The Ascape?
Correct. How is it
It's great.
working for you guys?
It's great. It's actually, it's good.
I'm very intrigued about that. I saw that on the website a few weeks back, and I was like, "Do I trust a robot to massage me?"
Yeah, we're launching that in Nashville as an experiment, but I really like the product.
Yeah, me too.
And John, can you touch a little bit about what's the future for Padel United? I'm going to bet that this is not your only one location that you're sitting in now, at least for the medium and long term. So, what's the future for the brand and locations and geographies and offerings?
We're going to be very, I would say, patient, and we're going to be very opportunistic. What we've learned thus far, and honestly, like as much as the business has been open for 6 months, the wellness only opened 2.5 weeks ago. So for me, it's about understanding and learning all of the different dynamics that we can between membership, court play, spa utilization, gym, etc. And we've already now, as a baseline, know that we won't look at less than 50,000 square feet because we're stretched right now. We have a couple of sites that we're looking at in Westchester, Long Island. My background is in real estate, so working with developers on larger projects around master planning in affluent suburban areas is really what our focus is. But we're going to be opportunistic. It's just that out of everything I've built in my career, this is an engineering project. I mean, the utility rooms that exist to power a 20-person cold plunge and a 45-person sauna and salt scrubbing and mineral release into these it's just wild. And again, I want to just lean in as heavily as possible into, the wellness, regenerative, longevity field, right? Paddle is paddle. The courts are the courts. And as many as we can get, we'll put in. But we have this sort of model that we're looking at that combines these two things, and both are equally as important. One will continue to evolve. So we brought in the Escape, we have the Immortal Chamber, we're now looking at hyperbaric chambers. That's a very important part of this business for us. We're integrating, we'll announce in a couple of weeks with a huge medical company that'll have a facility in here. So those are the pieces that we need to be really sharp around, that have all kinds of infrastructure and engineering things that have to be done really, really carefully. So, yeah, certainly we're going to grow and we're going to open up locations, but I'm not one of these guys sitting here telling you that, yeah, we're going to have 10 in the next 12 months. So that's not the case. This is the long game.
Also, in our case, Alex, this has been in the works for 4.5 years. Like we are 3 years old. Padel House is 3 years old, but all of these locations have been in the works for years. I think it's a game of patience, and real estate in the U.S. plays a key role on growth. And there aren't many real estate locations or warehouses in the US that could fit a concept like either John's or mine.
And one thing I wanted to ask, Santi, you might be better versed to answer this than John, but obviously, John, you may have a view as well. So in Europe, you have this Padel y Cañas kind of community atmosphere, that it's not paddle unless you have a beer afterwards. And a lot of people that really resonate with paddle, especially in Europe, is the social, the music over the speakers, the drinks, the cocktails, the beers. Is that as important a component of the offering in the US as it is in Europe, or does the US have its own spin on that?
I think it's equally important creating a atmosphere around the courts. So everything off court is as important as what happens in the court. At our when we design our clubs, we put a lot of attention into the social lounges that we create around the club, and definitely it plays a key part of it. We have liquor license in all of our locations as well. We have a soft liquor license in New York. We have a full liquor license in Nashville, for example. And everything that happens off court is as important.
And what about you, John? Obviously, you've got this wellness 360 body attentive feel to your club, but is that mutually exclusive, or does that work well with a kind of a laid back, switch off, let your hair down, relax vibe that Padel seems to have in Europe?
Yeah, so we're about 30 days away from finishing the build out up on another mezzanine up across from here of a 35-person bar and restaurant. So to give you a sense of how much we believe in the importance of that. But I think what's unique here is that, and exciting to be honest, is that you have two guys on here, right? Santi had really two of the best restaurants in Manhattan, at least two of my favorites that had an unbelievable following and vibe and energy, right? I actually own a restaurant 3 blocks away from here. It's a 300-seat restaurant with 4 bars. It was just ranked best restaurant in New Jersey. So the approach to this, from at least the two of us, is from this sense of hospitality and social dynamic, right? Honestly, it's a gift to the sport, but it's a really great thing for the culture overall, right? That this is at our core. I'm going to speak on your behalf, right? But at our core, these are the things that drive, right? Hospitality and a unique energy and vibe and experience. So, I mean, that's a great thing that will show up and prove to be very valuable for everybody.
And can you touch, I think, Santi, you mentioned this, the challenge of real estate and planning in the US. Is the challenge in the fact that it's quite varied? Is the challenge in it that a lot of people don't quite know what paddle is? And so you've got this kind of nervousness from people who do the planning, who do the regulations. I know that the real estate and paddle or property and paddle event was at your venue recently, John. Can you touch on the challenges that, or not, if the case may be that way, that the real estate infrastructure and ecosystem around planning and regulations, what role does that play in? Is it a real obstacle or actually it's fairly smooth?
So real estate developers are tapped into the zeitgeist, and this is front and center. You won't find a real estate developer that hasn't been pitched a paddle club or hasn't heard of a paddle club, right? I don't think that's the issue. The fundamental issue is that you need 25 to 35-foot ceilings and 35-foot wide column spacing, which virtually doesn't exist. It is a very difficult box to find. Like Santi said, he's been at this for 4 years and probably looked at 100 different things. And all I do is look at real estate. So it's a very high barrier of entry because of, I would say, those two reasons: ceiling heights and column spacing.
And do you feel like with the proliferation of interest in building clubs, are you finding actually that although you already had a very tight window of opportunity in terms of locations, now the competitive landscape has become so difficult that actually, even if a warehouse or a site comes up, now instead of 2 or 3 people looking at it, there's 20 people piling in trying to put in a paddle venue, some reputable, some with experience, some trying their first shot. Has that become more challenging?
Yeah, I must say there's a problem that we have in the US that I'm seeing, that some people are making, there's some irrational behavior from people trying to get to market and probably agreeing on leases that they will not be able to pay in the future, or buying land at prices that will not be able to sustain a paddle club. So I think that in 2025 and 2026, we're gonna see for the first time some paddle clubs go out of business because
Mhm.
they were not taking the right leases. They just wanted to get to market with terms that were not the right ones, or people that are taking locations that are just in the middle of nowhere, and they're not going to be there and they're signing 10-year leases, and they're not going to be there in 2 3 years when competitors come and open up closer to where the families and peoples are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We had a lot of the guys here from Miami, and I think you're seeing a lot of that in Miami. And I don't think it's any different than any trend that exists that I've seen over 20 years in any category of brand, right? Something that comes in and that's exciting and has good margins, people are excited about, and then you get 100 entrepreneurs who run at it. 90 of them have no idea what they're doing, but have convinced somebody to give them a bunch of money. And then it usually takes about 24 months for 90% of those leases or half built spaces or fully built spaces to just churn. This, I think, will suffer from that in an extraordinary level because of the complexities around permitting. So when you're taking an industrial warehouse, if that's what people are going after, and you need to have that rezoned for a fitness or athletic use, that could take anywhere from 3 months to 2 years, depending on where you are. And nobody's paying rent for that long or allowing that burn to happen. So it's exactly like Santi just said. This will all happen over the next 2 years. We just had a club that opened up and 4 months later in New Jersey closed down. And it will keep happening.
And can you touch a little bit about investment? You just mentioned about people paying money. How important has investment been in your respective brands' evolutions? And will it continue to play a role as you try and build out and find new locations? What do you look for from investors and from the investment community more generally?
I think for us, investment has been crucial. And as we really expand, strategic capital will allow us to scale and maintain the quality that we have. And by strategic capital, I mean people that can bring on opportunities in real estate, people that can help us develop new markets. We have a few investors in some of the markets that we're opening, which is great. They become kind of our ambassadors in those markets. And also, what I can tell you is the cost of building a facility in the US is much higher than elsewhere. So, because of that, bringing new investment every time is going to be more important. We're going through our third funding round right now, and we'll probably be our second to last diluted capital round in the life of our company.
And what about you, John? What's your take on this?
So for us, it was just critical that we actually didn't bring in any strategic capital, but that we did this with just a small group of really neighbors and friends, and that we own really the majority of this business, and that we did that and we're able to maintain that position until we were able to get this first one up and running and understanding what this was. Because if I told you the amount of iterations that we made during the build phase, had we not had patient capital or the ability to make quick decisions, it would not have been a great process. And so right now, we've been having meetings, and obviously there's a lot of capital that's looking for who and what to put into, and everything from the balls to the rackets to the actual clubs. But we're being very, very, very patient and very slow to make any decisions and just having conversations because one, we don't need to take on any capital. And two, I think that once we understand exactly how many locations and the specific locations that are lined up and a very clear sense with a buffer of how much capital we need to open those locations, only then, and obviously the right group, which is everything, right? Only then will we start to make some of those decisions.
And what advice would you give to investors when looking at clubs and brands to get behind? Do you have any kind of do's and don'ts that you would suggest to them based on your experiences already to date?
I think there's a lot of projects out there that are attracting capital, as John said, that are probably not businessmen out there. And I just say be cautious where you invest money because there are some good projects out there, but there's also some projects that are going to go south in the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, and I think even parlay off of that, if there's somebody on an executive or leadership team on a business plan, if there isn't an individual who's actually built, physically built, whether it's a significantly sized restaurant or a multitude of brick and mortar concepts, but it's a finance guy and somebody who ran like tennis clinics at a club, I would walk away faster than anything. This is like 80% of this is a real estate development project And I've seen 42 business plans of some creative Instagram person. And it's like, yeah, which one of you has ever put a hammer in the ground, right? That to me would be the biggest red flag.
Well, we're drawing towards the end of this episode. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the US scene generally. What do you see in the future for the US markets, and what do you think are the most important opportunities and roadblocks that need to be tackled or addressed for the US market to really reach its full potential?
I think that paddle, and everybody's aware that paddle is on the verge of explosive growth. No, but what's the only thing that's missing is infrastructure and awareness. I think the infrastructure is yet to catch up with the hype, at least in the US, and awareness as well. It's a very big country. There's 300 million people here. And if outside of Miami, New York, and the big cities, there's a lot of people that do not know what the sport is. So I think that creating awareness and building top tier facilities is something that we should be seeing in the next few months.
John?
Yeah, for me, I think guys like us are going to continue to build facilities, and that's going to be important. I think relative to the scale and the opportunity, it's going to be pretty small in comparison to what the demand could be. It's much easier to open up a pickleball club or outdoor pickle facility than it is a paddle court. Um, but that is what it is. I see things like the opportunity around media and marketing. I think that what the Reserve Cup has done is crucial for the sport. I think that some of the events that you've done in Brooklyn and the potential for that with larger sponsorship is a very important thing. I think there's been a lot of volatility around some of the initial infrastructure that was put into place and some of the leagues and other things. As that stuff starts to become a little more sturdy, I think it will help benefit the sport overall. But somebody's really got to take the reins and start to do what really, honestly, guys like Wayne Boych and Reserve Cup and others are doing, and what Santi's done. He's really like a first mover here.
And do you think you touch on the Reserve Cup, things like the Pro Padel League, the fact that Premier Padel is coming to Miami in the next couple of months? Do you think these are all things that really move the needle for people who already play paddle in the US, as well as people who haven't heard about it? Do you think it really is a key piece of the marketing mix from your points of view?
It is, and then you don't have any courts to go follow up on, right? Relatively speaking. So that may generate a huge amount of attention online and on socials, but then where do you go play? And I think that relative to what the exposure might create in terms of a demand, there aren't really that many places to play right now.
Yeah, if you think, Alex, these are part of the two things that I said: awareness, which comes by doing things like the Reserve Cup, the PPL, Premier Paddle, brands coming and sponsoring those events, and then infrastructure, which is a part of building facilities like we are.
They have to go hand in hand, I guess, is what you're saying, right? Because otherwise the supply and demand goes off balance. And my final question before we wrap up, this goes to a lot of people in a lot of markets. How can externals, i.e., non Americans, how can externals help your projects or the US ecosystem more generally? What's the call to action for those listeners?
We have a ton of support and guidance and information from a lot of different groups out of Europe, specifically in Spain, who've been watching this or a part of this in some capacity for the last 10 to 20 years. And they are heavily invested, in the success of paddle in America. And so I think that they are actively looking to align and then support the growth of individuals like us, right, who want to go out and expand. So from my standpoint, I see a lot of support from groups out of Europe and Spain.
I think that externals, meaning anyone in the ecosystem in the US, can put this little grain of salt from building awareness, from getting brands where they work at to do events at our clubs, to being part of the sponsoring one of the pro leagues or the cups. I think that's what's creating the ecosystem grow, and the players themselves, I think are can help grow, make it grow faster.
I think that pretty much wraps up our episode. I mean, we've covered so many topics. Thank you so much. Again, please like, share, and subscribe if the content was thought provoking. Please comment on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any recommendations around our format, topics we should devote an episode to, questions we should ask, speakers we need to bring on. We want you, all those driving the next phase of this industry's future, to tell us what you want to hear about and who from. Thank you, Santi and John, for joining us today. We will keep doing our best to cover all the angles of the business around padel, episode after episode. Until the next one.